Good morning. Fall is in the air, and I welcome you to Metropolitan Community College's final program in honor of Hispanic Latino Heritage Month. Thanks to everyone for your patience in the rescheduling of this program from earlier in the month. My name is Barbara Velasquez. As many of you know, Hispanic Latino Heritage Month is designated as September 15th through October 15th and recognizes the achievements and contributions of Hispanic and Latino champions who have or are inspiring others to achieve success. The 2021 national theme for Hispanic Heritage Month is Esperanza, a celebration of Hispanic heritage and hope. Your microphones and chat with other audience members are turned off, but you may always contact the host. Send your questions at any time to moderator Barbara Velasquez. Please watch for the chat for a link to the online evaluation of today's program. If your email is included in your Zoom account, the link will also be emailed to you. Completing the evaluation and including your name and contact information may qualify you for recognition throughout the year. On August 12, 2021, BBC News wrote, in Venezuela, the government of President Nicolás Maduro and the opposition are engaged in a bitter power struggle. The South American country has been caught in a downward spiral for years with growing political discontent, further fueled by rocketing hyperinflation, power cuts, and shortages of food and medicine. More than 5.6 million Venezuelans have left the country in recent years. Valentina Oropeza is a Venezuelan journalist who founded the investigation units of the Venezuelan websites Provinci and Contrapunto. Oropeza has written for newspapers in Germany, Venezuela, Mexico, and Ecuador, and was a correspondent for Agence France Press in Caracas. Valentina was also a grantee at the Pulitzer Center and a fellow at the World Press Institute at St. Paul University. She studied journalism at the Andrés Bello Catholic University in Caracas, received a master's degree in international relations at the Barcelona Institute for International Studies, and received a diploma in journalism and development at the Indian Institute of Mass Communication in New Delhi. Please welcome Valentina Oropeza, connecting from Caracas, who will present Crisis in Venezuela.
Hi, Professor. Thank you for having me here. Thank you all for attending to this presentation. And thank you especially for having the interest of learning a little bit more about the crisis in Venezuela. If you agree, I'm going to share my screen. I will start this presentation talking to you a little bit about who are Venezuelans among the Hispanic community in the US. Then we're going to talk about how Venezuela became the biggest humanitarian emergency in the Western Hemisphere in the 21st century. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the contributions that Venezuelan journalists has done to maybe not resolve the situation or concrete problems, but to provide reliable information to people. There's something very important for you to know, and that is that the governments of Hugo Chavez and Nicolás Maduro they stopped publishing public data on fundamental issues such as poverty or health indexes or crime. So since many, many years ago, we don't know who gets sick from what and where in Venezuela. We don't know how many people die from violent crimes. We don't know where they are. We don't know how many kids are dying from hunger. So all this lack of data has allowed the government to hide the seriousness of the situation. And that is why journalism has been so important in these years. The US is a country of 328 million people, and 18.5% of them are Hispanic or Latinos. As you can see in the map, most of them are located in the southern states of the US. And I guess that's because it's they're closer to the border with Mexico. And as you can imagine, that is one of the main entrants of the Hispanic migration to the US, not only by airports, but through the land borders, right? Venezuelans are not the main Hispanic populations in the US. As you can imagine, that would be Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, people from El Salvador or Cuba. However, the Venezuelan population has registered by far the fastest growth rate among Hispanic origin groups in the last years. That means that we had 421,000 Venezuelans in the US in 2017, and we are the 5th largest South American immigrant population in the US after Colombians, Brazilians, Peruvians, and Ecuadorians. Now I'm going to explain you why this happened. Venezuela in the 60s, 70s, and 80s used to be one of the most developed countries in Latin America. For example, we built Guri, which was the largest hydroelectric power station in the 80s, and it was so for many years, even to the 2000s. We used to have the 2nd largest metro system after Brazil, and we used to be the destination of many South Americans escaping from dictatorships and from authoritarian regimes in Argentina, Chile, Peru, or Brazil. Venezuela is a country, as you can see in the map, located in the north of South America. We have a population of 27.3 million people. We speak Spanish, and we are mainly Catholics. Over the last years, we have had breaking points regarding our economic, social, and political situation. Our first breaking point at the economic level happened in 1983 in an episode we call the Black Friday, which has nothing to do with your Black Friday and your sales, right? The Black Friday from Venezuelans is the day when the local currency, which name is the Bolivar, registered its first devaluation, important devaluation. From that moment on, the inflation in Venezuela started to grow 2 digits every year. So when we reached 1989, we had the second breaking point, which was the Caracazo. The Caracazo was a popular riot in Caracas and the slums and the cities around the capital, of people protesting against an economic reform that planned to increase the prices of fuel and gasoline. Why did people was against this measure? Because we were accumulating an important inflation over the years, and increasing the prices of fuel was going to have a big impact on the prices of goods and services, of course. So when we reached 1992, we have a political breaking point, which were 2 military coups d'etat. The first one was led by Hugo Chavez, who took office as president in 1999 through an election. How did we finance that development that we had in the 60s, 70s, and 80s? Well, through our oil exports. We used to be one of the world's largest exporters of oil, and we were founding members of OPEC, and we still have the largest proven oil reserves in the world. That would be more than 300 billion barrels. But what has happened over the years, as you can see in the graphic, is that our oil production has been declined. This has happened for many reasons. Well, that would be very complex to explain, but it's mainly because of on the one hand, the economic collapse has inhibited the state to do the investment on the oil industry in order to at least maintain the oil production, but also because of corruption, right? And then since we were, our main source of income was the oil exports, What happened was that when we started to, when the oil exports started to decline, our GDP per capita or our income started to decline as well. That meant that people started to have less and less money to afford daily life, right? And regarding daily life, what has happened in Venezuela is a very dramatic phenomenon, which is called inflation. This means that every month we have registered an increase of prices, and what happened is that salaries remain behind. And this means that you cannot afford daily life with your job, because every time it's more and more difficult to achieve the purpose of buying regular things that like food or medicines with the same salary that you have the month before or the year before. You can see this rise very dramatically. From 2017, in November 2017, we started to have something that almost all the economies of the world has overcome, which is called hyperinflation. Hyperinflation means that the prices rises more than 50% every month, depending on the area, depending on the good and the services. I'm talking to you, I mean, like the floor is the 50%, but this could be 1000% in 1 month. So over the last years, we reached this impossible to pronounce figure of inflation rate. And this is something that might be fun for you, but the word billion in Spanish has not the same zeros that in English. I think billions in English is 9 zeros, if I'm correct. So that would be 3 billion% of inflation in the last 4 years. In daily life, what this means is that you cannot eat, you cannot buy a pill with this rate of inflation, right? So in 2015, we have another breaking point that you can call it from from a social perspective again, because the local NGOs allied with the opposition movement denounce at that moment that the collapse of the economy, the state institution, and the public services caused a complex humanitarian emergency. Why do we call it complex? Because it's not an emergency caused by a natural disaster like the earthquake in Haiti in 2010, or by an armed conflict that like in Syria. This is an emergency caused by a political decision, by the political willing of not addressing the main policies that needed to be done in order to guarantee to people the access to basic rights, such as food, drinking water, health, and education. And when I tell you this, I'm referring that people were having a lot of difficulties to buy food, not only because of the hyperinflation, but because of the shortage of food and especially medicines. I can give you a very personal anecdote on this. My father was sick of Alzheimer's, and we couldn't find his medicines here. So what I used to do was when we could travel like normally before the pandemic, and I could travel around because of my job, I used to go to pharmacies in Miami or in Mexico City or in Madrid, and I used to like buy all the medicines that I could get for my father or for another relatives or for the parents of my friends or for even people that I didn't even know, just to take them here and to allow them to have access to that, right? In 2018, we have another breaking point. I'm gonna try, if you allow me, if I can do this so you can see it. Okay. I think you can read, exactly. You can read the text here. So we have another breaking political point in 2018, because the Supreme Court, which all the judges are appointed by Maduro, decided that the opposition coalition could not participate as a group in the elections. many of the opposition leaders at the time were in exile or were prosecuted or were in jail. So what we had in May 2018 was that Maduro was elected for a second 6-year term with, of course, the majority, almost 68% of the votes. And many states in the world, such as the US, the European Union, or Canada, or Australia, didn't recognize the result of these elections because they denounced that they were the minimum standards of transparency and democracy and respect for the state of law were not committed at the time, right? Okay, I'm gonna change now this to this side. So imagine the situation we Venezuelans were having when the pandemic arrived in 2020. People had to work despite the confinement because of the hyperinflation that I was telling you before. There was a very low or no access to water, to running water for washing hands. We were having power cuts everywhere, especially in hospitals that should provide mechanical ventilation to COVID-19 patients. We had a shortage of gasoline and fuel, especially from last year in Caracas, because this has been happening in many other states of the country before. But in Caracas, it started to be very difficult from last year. And the schools had to close, not only because of the confinement, but especially because of the collapse of the public services. Schools didn't have electricity, didn't have water, and the parents and the teachers were having a lot of trouble to reach the schools, right? Now, I would like to tell you how the journalism has contributed to at least provide reliable information on this period. This is the first investigation that I offered to my editors in Pro Da Vinci when they hired me. I told them we need to know how, at least to have an idea in terms of data of how is the access to running water in Venezuela. In 2016 and 2017, public state companies that manage the service used to publish rationing plans. So what we did was we analyzed with a couple of economists that help us to do this. We analyzed the data of these rationing plans, and we discovered that at least 1/3 of the country, that would be almost 10 million people, were living on their rationing plans. We also discovered that the average access to running water was 2 days per week. That means 2 days out of 7. If you see in this infographic, I'm sorry, it's not written in English, but in this infographic, you can see that 4.3 million people were living with 43 to 63 hours of running water per day. We had 2.2 million people living with 22 to 42 hours of running water every week. And you have this very small minority of almost 50,000 people that had almost full access of running water 24/7, right? This had at that moment a lot of impact, and it still does, because this is the only measure that we have of access to running water in Venezuela until now. This has been useful for foundations, NGOs, local and international NGOs that address this issue. And the very bad result that we got after this is that the government stopped publishing the rationing plans in 2018 and on. So we don't have the figures for the rest of the years. That's a pity, because I really wanted to do, like the running water access until now. I'm going to share with you another screen. Just give me 1 second. Okay. I guess you can see, right? Do you see this? Okay. Hyperinflation. We did a multimedia feature to explain people in Venezuela what hyperinflation was. And one of our main goals was to explain, to show how the value of the money was lost in a context of hyperinflation. And we figure out that this visualization, telling people that these 100 bolivars used to be the highest bill in Venezuela for many years. So what we thought was, okay, let's tell people how many eggs you can buy with this bill over the years. When I was like evaluating the data in my Excel program, I didn't think it was so shocking until the design team created this. So if you can see the progress, it had a lot of impact in social media here in Venezuela when people saw that this was an evidence that it was very hard to afford food in Venezuela because of the devaluation of the currency. After this, we are, like we journalists, we are trying all the time, and especially in Pro Da Vinci where I work, we're trying to figure out all the time what is the best way to tell a story. It's not always just it's not always a written story, right? So we try to look for visualizations that can be very shocking and very direct people, right? So 2 years ago, I ran an investigation on the transmission of malaria. Why? Because Venezuela became the main focus of transmission of malaria in the Americas. We had, it increased for 886% in 10 years. That is many, many people sick of malaria, right? And we had the same problem. In the beginning, we thought, okay, this data that you're seeing here was not provided by the government in the local report of the Ministry of Health. This data was provided by the government to the World Health Organization because they are forced to do it. They have to provide the data to the UN agencies, right? So what we did was, well, how can we tell people how the increase has been taking place, right? So we found out that in 2014 we had almost 92,000 people sick of malaria. But for the next year, it was almost 138,000 people in 2015. But the next year, it was almost 243,000 people. And in 2017, it was almost a double. What did that mean? It meant that the public policies regarding the diagnosis and treatment of the malaria was not working, because otherwise, if you take the measures that you need to take in order to block the mosquito to infect so many people, you would see a drop on the transmission very quickly. So I'm going to unshare this screen again. Are you seeing the screen? Because I want to come back to the...
We see the casos de malaria.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to, okay. Now you're seeing the...
Yes, now we're seeing access to running water screen.
Okay.
Yeah, crimes against humanity.
Right. So what happened here is, I don't know why I cannot move this. Just, sorry, I need, oh, sorry. I'm trying, I don't know what it's not working. Just give me, okay, now I think it will work. If we do this. Right. Are you seeing crime against humanity, right?
Correct, yes.
Great. What we, last year we Venezuelans had a very shocking news, because the United Nations Commission for Human Rights appointed an independent international mission to come to Venezuela and investigate the cases of patterns of violation and crimes, right? And what they found was that there was systematic use of torture, of arbitrary killings, extrajudicial executions, politically motivated detentions, and protest-related violations perpetrated by the state, meaning the government and the officials of the government. This means, of course, the military power, the policemen, and all the political elite that are above them, right? So this was very shocking last year, because beside the pandemic and all the, digamos, the health, let's say this, the health situations that I was talking to you before, we found out that this, that has happened to many people that we know, was actually an state policy. It was planned, and even though they have, even though the United Nations is investigating this in order to take these Venezuelan officials to criminal courts abroad, they are still doing this. This is still happening in Venezuela. The systematic use of torture or the arbitrary killings. And even though we haven't heard news about journalists being tortured, we do have, well, most of my colleagues are in exile right now because they have been prosecuted by the judicial power by publishing things that the government doesn't want to be known, right? So what is the result of all this landscape that I've been describing to you? The result is that we have 5.7 million Venezuelans now like refugees or migrants around the world. Most of them have fled to Latin America and the Caribbean. And that is why we saw in the beginning of the presentation that we had that, it rose, the migration of Venezuelans to the US in 2017. Venezuelans are looking for places to be safe, to be able to work, to be able to recover in terms of their finances, but I would say also in terms of their emotions, because it is very hard to live under so many pressure, right? And well, the US is a country of migrants, and probably some of you are migrants as well, or your parents are. And the thing is that when you leave your family behind, when you leave your house behind, it is very painful, even though you know you're looking for a better future abroad. In all this context, there's something very important and very difficult to assess, which is the impact of the US sanctions on Venezuela, right? As you may know, in August 2017, Donald Trump's administration prohibited the government of Venezuela, including PDVSA, which is the state oil company, from accessing to US financial markets. In January 2019, those sanctions also prohibited any US entity or person from establishing any commercial relationship with PDVSA, and all the assets of the oil state company in the US were frozen. When I was preparing this presentation, I did some research on what the experts have said about the impact of the sanctions on Venezuela. And I found an investigator that, well, he said that since the US sanction blocked the exports of the Venezuelan oil company, forced the government to allow the entrance of humanitarian aid, because they didn't have money enough to like keep a minimum of regular transactions and transactions in terms of money and in terms of good to I mean, good for selling, I mean, like buying food and medicines abroad, but also to guarantee the functioning of the public services, right? So there's a positive impact of this is that the sanctions force the government to allow the entrance of humanitarian aid. And at the same time, and this is something that I haven't told you before, we live with an exchange control for many, many years, which means that it was doing transactions with dollars or euros or whatever foreign currency you can choose was a crime in Venezuela until 2 or 3 years ago. I would say 2 years ago, because they were forced to open up the economy and to let people like do transactions and buy and sell things in dollars, because they were not believers enough. Because the amount of pieces of bills that you had in the street were not enough to do all the transactions that people needed to do. So what we're having now is that we don't have this, we're not facing right now the worst phase of the shortage. I mean, you can find food, of course, and medicines right now in Venezuela, but the problem is the cost. The problem is that many people cannot afford to buy what things cost, because everything is imported. Another thing, another result of the U.S. sanction is that before we used to have many products imported from the U.S. Right now, the imports come from the countries that are allied to Maduro, like Iran, Turkey, Russia, and China. So, for example, if I go to the supermarket and I pick up a rice, and all the instructions come in Arabic or in Persian, that didn't happen before the sanctions, right? Well, I hope this has been useful for you, and I'm happy to hear your questions if you have any.
Thank you so much, Valentina. We really appreciate your being with us. And yes, we have questions coming in. And I want to encourage the audience members to shoot those questions in. Don't lose this opportunity to speak directly through chat with Valentina Oropeza, a citizen of Venezuela. I know that our concerns about Venezuela have been out there. So send that to moderator Barbara Velasquez. Our first question, and we want to thank Professor Dallas Chirisevic, who has her Spanish class with us. How reliable is the data the government, the Venezuelan government, is sending to the World Health Organization?
In my perspective, not a drop. I mean, it's not, I don't think it's reliable. And not only because they want to hide the real data, but because the state is so weak that it's very difficult for them to gather statistics, especially in the countryside. I'm going to give you an example. The main focus of transmission of malaria in Venezuela is located in the southern of the country, in a place called the Mining Arc, which is an area in the Venezuelan Amazon that Maduro opened for the extraction of gold, right? Imagine that these are like the mining golds that you see in movies, right? It's very far away from everything. You don't have signal of anything, you don't have internet connection, you don't have electricity, you don't have anything. I have gone there with many doctors trying to diagnose malaria and provide treatment to people. You don't have, I mean, the people there are absolutely tired. It's super wet, it's very hot. You are trying to be as much accurate as you can when you fill the forms of each patient, but they do it by hand. They don't have, they have so many restrictions to do their job in a very accurate and professional way. I really, even though that doctor is very willing to do his job in the best way he can, all the chain that data that he's gathering, that little small place where the malaria is a very big issue. The chain that it has to go through until it reaches Caracas and the Ministry of Health, and people who are not specialized, they are Chavistas, but they are not specialized in the gathering and assessing this data. Well, I wouldn't believe in that figures at all. And I'm talking to you about malaria because that is the issue that I really know for very close, because I have worked with them. That happens with everything. I'm working right now on an investigation on acute malnutrition and infant mortality, and there's no figures about that. There's no data. We don't know how many children under 5 years old have died in Venezuela for the last 5 years. We have no idea. So, of course, they have to give some information, but I don't think that the UN has the capacity to doing fact-checking over that. They don't. It's impossible. I mean, the government, it's like, I give you what I want to give you. You cannot force me to do anything beyond that. And it's not only with Venezuela, I would say it's with every country.
Thank you very much. We've got great questions coming in. I did mention our professor in her class, but I want everybody else to know I won't be giving out names. So if you have questions that you'd like to ask confidentially, know that I won't be sharing your names, because some of the information we have to realize is very sensitive. Thank you again. Let me give you the next question. We don't want this to become a political conversation, but why would Trump do such a thing as prohibit PDVSA from our financial markets? What does that do for the US? What did it do to Venezuela? And how did Venezuela overcome that obstacle?
Right. This is a very complicated issue to assess, as I said before, but this is the thing, that he had the political interest on trying to overthrow Maduro. Why? Because Maduro became like he's the symbol of the dictatorship, of the authoritarian regimes in Latin America. Even though we have the Castros in Cuba, or we have Ortega in Nicaragua, there's a huge political interest in the world, not only in Venezuela, to take this guy out of office, right? So, and it's very interesting because he was very vocal. He had very hard opinions on Maduro, and he promised that the sanctions were his attempt to take him out of office. But at the same time, he didn't improve the conditions for migration of Venezuelans. That happened with Biden this March. So Venezuelans in the US, well, those who had the criteria to criticize this used to say, okay, you're saying that you are trying to help us to take this guy out because he's a dictator, but at the same time, you're not giving us better conditions to arrive to the US, even though you know that it's very hard for us to get to come here. That is one thing. I would say that it was at his political convenience to do this, right? It made that decision made him popular, made him to have a voice, to get involved in a crucial issue for Latin America, to increase the influence of the US in Latin America at the moment, because we are, as I showed you before, we are the main migration crisis of the region. So everyone is affected by what is happening in Venezuela. Colombia, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, everyone is affected because we are throwing people away like rivers, right? So on the other hand, what has happened, I think the sanctions were made life more difficult to people, not to the Venezuelan politicians, to people. Why? Because we started to have more difficulties to achieve some things, right? To for example, to buy, let's give you an example. If you have a clinic here in Caracas and you're trying to buy a medical machine made in the US, because of the sanctions, many of them couldn't sell you the medical machine. Even though you are a private, you are an independent, you're an individual, that has nothing to do with the political issue. So that made things more complicated for people, for sure. Nonetheless, if you talk with someone, this is we are a very polarized society, right? So I think this might happen in the US as well with Trump. But what happens here is if you are against Maduro, you cannot criticize Trump. You cannot criticize anything that goes against him, even though they are a disaster as well. That happens with the opposition. I mean, the Venezuelan opposition has made many mistakes, but if you don't agree with Maduro's policy, you cannot criticize the opposition. That is the way that people see it here. And that is the way that many Venezuelans see it, because we are very, I would say, sensitive and I would say traumatized with all the things we have lived in the last years. I don't know if this answers your question, but I think it's the best answer that I can get for you.
Thank you so much, Valentina. These are complicated questions in complicated times. So we do appreciate everything you're providing to us. We have an audience member who wonders if they missed the answer to this question, so they apologize if asking it. But what exactly caused the hyperinflation?
Okay, this is also a complex answer. I have interviewed many economists that have explained me that this is the thing. The only way to finance the public expenses, meaning, for example, the investment that the government has to do in social programs, is through your local currency, right? I mean, you print bills of your local currency to finance all the activities of the states. At some point during the Chavismo, we didn't have the amount of local currency that were circulated in the street, didn't have a support in our reserves. The Venezuelan central bank was printing more bills that we had actually in our reserves, in our, let's say, like in the true money that we had in reserves. So and Chavez did this in order to maintain the sensation that we were in prosperity, and he was able to finance or to afford many social programs, but they were not, those expenses were not, they didn't have the support in our in our reserves. That's the answer to that. Does that make sense to you?
I think that's.
Remember that I'm not an expert on economy, but this is what happened. That they started to print bills that didn't have any support on the reserves, on real money.
The person who sent that said, "Thank you. Your answer well explained my question." So
great, thank you.
All right, now we have people concerned about the safety of journalists. You did say that you have colleagues who are in exile. What is the role of a journalist within a society like Venezuela has now? Because of that, what dangers are there for journalists? And how does one, as a journalist, carry out their job and kind of tightrope that situation?
That is a very complicated question as well. Okay. we don't have a state of law that protects the rights of journalists. You don't, if something happens to you, you don't go to the prosecutor, or you don't go to the judges or to a trial here that is going to be independent from the government, and you will feel confident about their decisions. That doesn't exist here. What you do is you try to cover yourself as much as you can. You try to protect yourself with your own people, with your editors, with your colleagues, with organizations abroad that know the situation in Venezuela. The levels of threats are very high and they're very different. I'm going to give you an example, and I really ask you to you cannot say a word about this. But when I was doing the story of Malaria, the one that I showed you before, I went to this place in...
Valentina, are you start that recording again? Okay, thank you. So a question we have, I'm gonna play with this a little bit because I'm not sure that it's a fair question to ask to someone reporting about Venezuela, but the question is that US heading down the same path as Venezuela? And your expertise is in Venezuela. However, I know that people outside of the US understand our country better than we understand theirs, right? So I guess where I would move that question to is, do you see any similarities or differences between what you know about the US and how Venezuela is that can help us to see if we need to be concerned that we're headed in the same direction?
Right. Of course, you're not heading to the exactly same path because you have a completely different political and economic system, of course. But if I'm honest with you, when you had your last presidential election, I was very concerned to see the polarization of the US. Why? Because we have been living on this for more than 20 years. And polarization is like a cancer, is a disease, is a social disease that justifies that you start to believe that you can finish up the other because he doesn't think like you. I think that Trump played that card a lot during his government and during the election. And I was very surprised to see the US very, very polarized from a political perspective. I know you have many issues regarding the racial, your racial background, but what I saw last year with your political election made me feel concerned, because after what we have lived here, my lesson, what I learned is that polarization only benefits the politicians, only benefits those that are manipulating the people and manipulating the voters from behind. And it's not real. I mean, people who live in the same country, who are raised in the same country, who are born in the same country, really share a background of cultural values, of a history. There are so much more things that make you similar than different. So and that's a lesson not only for the US, I would say for every country. You can see that in Spain, for example, regarding the claim for autonomy to Catalonia versus Madrid. It's exactly the same. It's the politician playing with the mind and with the heart of people and making them believe that because we are different, because we think different things, we should be fighting, and I should come after you and try to get you out of my way. That is wrong. That is completely wrong. That destroyed my country. My country is not only destroyed by the economic collapse, it's destroyed because someone started to tell us You are poor because someone is rich. You are poor, you didn't have access, you cannot be better because someone else is rich, because someone else took that away from you. And that was not true. We have now a very difficult time to recognize the efforts and the achievements of other people, because we are thinking, oh, if that guy is successful, if that guy is rich, if that guy has a company, it's because he took something away from me. And it's not true. So I think maybe my perception might not be very accurate. I don't know. I just saw the news of your elections from Caracas, but polarization makes me concerned everywhere, because it's toxic and makes people lose their mind.
Thank you, Valentina. That's quite the difficult topic, and I think you addressed it so well. So regarding the crisis in Venezuela, I have several questions I'll throw at you, and you can address them as you feel appropriate. Is there anything U.S. residents and citizens can do to help? Does the Maduro regime make it dangerous for people to leave the country? You spoke a little about this. Is there racial conflict in Venezuela? And I think you've already helped us to understand what we in the US can do to avoid such a horrible situation in our own country.
Okay, regarding the help, I would say that there are different levels of help, right? You can, for example, you can identify an organization in Venezuela that works with humanitarian aid and provide them with money or medicines or things that can be delivered here and distributed here. That's a way to help, for example. I would say that having more knowledge on the situation in Venezuela, not the US perspective on the situation in Venezuela, but what is happening here, it's a way to also understand how the Venezuelans living in the US, looking for asylum or refugees in the US, are living and are facing. I mean, knowledge and understanding the country from our eyes, I think it's very important to understand what you are receiving over there. And it happens to with Mexicans, it happens with all the migrants, right? Not to say, oh, because these Latinos are, I don't know, bad, not well educated, or they are not. No, just stop and try to see the differences and try to see the particularities of each context and each country. For example, the Maras, the criminal gangs in Central America, are not the same that we have here, and are not the same guys that I face in southern Venezuela that they try to kill me. Not at all. They come from, even though the poverty has similarities, the contexts are not the same. So at the political level, if I tell you the truth, I'm not sure, because I think, of course, the US is a major power that can, we believe that we can help to look for a political solution to Venezuela. But at this point, I don't feel that's completely true. I think it's something that we Venezuelans have to do. The thing is that we have, our political landscape is very dark, and it's very, I mean, it's not only Maduro and the Chavismo who have been corrupted and who have been playing with the people. The opposition has done that as well. And that's something that cannot be arranged by the US or the European Union or anyone else. So this might not be a good answer for you, but I think that trying to have more knowledge on the local particularities of each context is important for avoiding mistakes like Afghanistan, maybe. Like when I was reading the news of Afghanistan, I didn't understand how these people have been there for 20 years and they're having this result, like after 20 years of military presence there, right? So what I thought was, did they really know what they were doing? So what I think regarding my country is, no, we Venezuelans, we have to think about this. We have to look for our own solutions. There's no way that someone else from abroad find that out for us. So maybe trying to support the organizations that provide not only humanitarian aid, but also education, not only in Venezuela, I would say in the whole developing world. We need people more educated in order to make better decisions, in order to not believe all the lies that these politicians try to sell to us all the time. I would say education is very important. I don't remember the other questions.
Thank you, Valentina. You are really providing us with such powerful, deep, thoughtful answers, and we're getting thank yous in the chat also related to that. So let's tie a couple of these together. There's a note of a recent spike in migration from Venezuela in the last few months. And also for those who are, if you know why that might be happening, and for those Venezuelans who are already in the US, perhaps permanent residents or TPS or citizens, many of them probably have families in Venezuela or in other parts of Latin America. Are they able to connect with their families with the thought that they may not be able to go to Venezuela and return so easily? And how does technology play a part in that? Are there problems with access to technology? That's a lot to.
Yes, no, well, it's very interesting actually, that question, because even though it's easier now to connect through WhatsApp or social media in general with anyone that you have far away from you, the thing in Venezuela is that because of the power cuts, there's many places that don't have internet connection now. So depending on the place in Venezuela that we're talking about, would be more difficult or easier for that person in the US to connect with a relative. That is the first thing. We are having more people fleeing the country in the last month because the borders are more open now that they were, for example, in the confinement last year, because many of them might be vaccinated already. Sorry, my cat is trying to, he's making a riot here because he wants to leave. And many people are like trying to use this moment to finally leave the country because the borders are open. We have flights. We didn't have, the airports were closed the whole years, the whole from March 2020, right? Regarding the technologies as well, there's something that is interesting because we almost don't have printed newspapers anymore because of the economic crisis and also the censorship. So people get informed and get connected through social media, right? So people believe what other relatives send them through WhatsApp, for example. If you are my cousin and you send me a message saying, oh, Biden is approving a measure that is going to make all Venezuelans come to the US without the need of any paper, I will believe it because you are my cousin and I believe in you. But I don't necessarily have the internet connection enough to verify the information or to access to the New York Times and see if that's true. So yes, technology, our access to technology now is not like for you guys over there. It's more complicated. But well, for example, someone like me I work for a digital magazine. I mean, we don't have a printed edition. What we try to do is like take advantage of all the apps and the things that we can use to communicate with people. Actually, what we have done here in the cases in the countryside, especially where we cannot reach, there's no digital audiences because there's no internet connection, we made an alliance with a group of journalists that what they do is the same news and the same stories that we publish in a digital platform, they do posters with that, and they place these posters in bus stations or in the entrance of supermarkets, and that's a way to reach that people that are disconnected. But we do have many people disconnected from those technologies, and especially from internet because of the power cuts.
Very, very interesting. Completely on another, for another reason, you know, there's a lot of places that are not doing print news and notes anymore. And we always talk about the generation divide and who's being left out, or the socioeconomic divide. And so that's interesting to see how that's being handled.
Yes.
Okay. I know you said that you do not report on certain types of things to keep yourself protected. We have a question about drug trafficking and the privileged groups who benefit from it. If that's something you think you shouldn't answer, we'll just move forward.
Okay, no, go ahead. I probably don't know the answer, so go ahead. I'm not an expert on that.
Okay, we'll move forward then. Let's see. Who is currently recognized as president? Is it Maduro or someone else?
No, well, we had, that's a very complicated story because we had the leader of the opposition. Probably you have heard about him. His name is Juan Guaido. Well, he was the president of the National Assembly. He tried to create like a parallel state with parallel powers, but it didn't work. That political strategy didn't work. It had the support of Trump, and it had the support of many countries, many governments, but it didn't work. So he is the president. I mean, he's exercising power. He is the president of the country. Even though he might not have an origin legitimacy, it doesn't matter. In practice, he is the one in charge. So that's the way it is.
Okay, thank you very much, very much. Back to the posters that are printed from electronic notices. I think this might be a US versus other issue, but someone wants to know if there are any legal issues involved with sharing the news via posters.
No, but because we have an alliance with them. I mean, we have an agreement that we produce the content. Let's say, imagine this investigation on malaria or on running water. And what they do is they try to transform that in something that can be printed, can be read in a public space, because we are not talking that you are like given papers or given things to people. No, people are walking in public spaces, and what you're trying to do is like to make them get informed with the basics of what we are talking about, right? It could be malaria, it could be running water, hyperinflation. There are no issue with there's no legal issue because it's an agreement that we have with this group of journalists that are doing this job to reach those non-digital audiences.
Thank you, thank you. A message to you, Valentina, you are a very brave woman. We wish you the best on your journey with everything that you do.
Thank you very much.
As related to that, I'd like to ask you, we talked about, I jot down a lot of notes when our presenters speak, and you talked about recovering economically, but also emotionally. So with Venezuela changing from a leader in so many ways, a world leader in so many ways, to the devastation that it is currently in, how do you, Valentina, maintain your mental health and suggestions that you have for others related to that?
I don't know if I maintain my mental health. I'm not pretty sure about that because I feel so angry and sad and worried many times. I do think that living this process has caused a lot of emotional damage to us, and even though to the people that has left because you leave your family here. I feel that in the street. I mean, you see in the street people doing things that don't make sense. For example, you see many people talking to themselves in the street because all their families have left. At a personal level, one of the things that I do a lot of exercise. I swim, I do yoga, I do meditation. I think this process to make me go deeper inside myself and try to make me to see to care about my internal peace, and it makes you do inner work at a spiritual level. It depends on each one, right? Religious level, the spiritual level. But I would say that the thing with this moment is that when you're facing something that is threatening your life or the life of the people that you love, your values change. The way you see life change. Maybe if you live in a very comfortable place, you are worried because you couldn't buy the last iPhone because, well, you really wanted to take that iPhone to the party of the weekend. When you don't have electricity for 4 days and nobody has informed what happened, and the whole country is dark and is incommunicated, you really don't care about what phone you have. You only care about the moment when you can have some signal in the phone to reach to your relatives and to your people and say, "Are you okay?" So your evaluation on what is important and what is not changed completely. I would say that I notice it with my friends that live abroad, that there are things that worry them that are not important for me at all. I know that living this process has made me a stronger human being. And I really thank that to the Chavismo and to the opposition and to those guys in southern Venezuela. And that makes me believe more and more in journalism because it's a way to build empathy. For those that are suffering right now, and for those that comes behind us, because there are many kids sorry, my cat is. There are many kids they're going to be raised in this Venezuela. So we need to fight for them. What country are we going to leave them? So we're fighting. We have to fight. I mean.
Thank you. Thank you. We can go back to that beautiful comment of what a brave woman you are. And if we can, I have 2 quick questions and then we'll be over. So thank you. The audience has been so good. I hate not to allow them to ask. One, I think you can answer quickly. Where do food and supplies come from that Venezuelans can access, and how are supermarkets getting their supplies?
Well, the local industry is diminished, but we have industry, I mean, producing food in the country right now. We have humanitarian aid coming from abroad, and we have the imports of the government. I mean, the government is importing things right now. The situation is not so dramatic as it was 4 years ago or 5 years ago. It has improved. We have what I told you before. We have worse moments of shortage than right now. So as I said before, the thing now is the prices of goods and services, right? Is that they're very, very high. But right now, if you can get the money, you can you can eat and you can feed your family properly. The thing is the money. The thing is the hyperinflation. Actually, I didn't tell you that, but we have hyperinflation in bolivars, but we have inflation in dollars, because everyone is speculating, right? If you import something at $1, you try to sell it here at $5. So there are many things here that you can find here that are more expensive than in the US or in any other country. But that is part of our economic chaos, right?
All right, our final question, and not a simple one, but is there anything you believe that can be done, and maybe it's happening, to change the status of Venezuela? What could bring the crisis to an end?
What could bring the crisis to an end? Well, this might sound very spiritual, and a spiritual answer, but I think that what can bring the crisis to an end is a change within each one of us. Those of us who are living it here in the country are those who are abroad. We need to think of what has happened to us. After all the pain we have suffered, after all the damage corruption has caused, violence has caused, and polarization has caused, I would say that every single individual here cannot remain to be the same person. I'm going to give you an example. If I reach a public position in the government someday, after all the things that I have seen, how could I steal public money, public resources, if I've seen what the damage that has caused to so many people? I know I don't have the answer from a political perspective or from economic perspective. I really don't know. But I would say that we really need to change from inside, each one of us, in order to create a social change, in order to have a reflection at the political level and an economic level. That's the only thing that I can think about.
Thank you. That's beautiful. Beautiful comment that helps us think deeper. You've shared so much, Valentina, and we have one final comment from an audience member that I believe would be a message that many of our audience can attest to. I have learned a lot from Valentina. I am grateful that she shared her time with us.
Oh, thank you very much. No, thank you for attending this and for having interest in know about Venezuela. I'm very happy to help with that.
I am so thankful that I had the opportunity to learn about you, Valentina, and for your willingness to join us today with such clear and up-to-date information on Venezuela. I loved, and I think our audience did too, that your goal as a journalist to make things evident through visuals is on point. Maybe never have seen such powerful representation. We do appreciate your addressing the questions, the many, many questions, and understanding that what you shared could have been a very new topic for some of our audience members. To our precious audience members, you prioritize your time to learn about new and important messages, and you show that you understand we are global citizens. The impact on one affects another. And to our students, please know that Metropolitan Community College will be here even after your graduation. We want you to continue this lifelong learning. Thank you to Isaac, who's been with us from technology. Would you please put up the evaluation slide, Isaac? You have this address in the chat. You can just click on it there. If your email is in your Zoom address, I will also email that to you, and we'll have that evaluation up for a week, and we'll be happy to share the feedback with Valentina and keep our communication up with her if she chooses. Next slide, Isaac. Oops, this is not the right one. So we are going to just say, take that down, please. The next slide, it should have been Native American Heritage Month is on its way. And our first presentation will be the evening of November 1st at 6:30 p.m. You can go to mccneb.edu/native to see the full series of events during the month in November. But Monday night, November 1st, get it on your calendar, 6:30 p.m. Mr. Kyle Ethelbaugh is going to present on how he overcame many challenges in his youth and upbringing to succeed through education. And if anybody wants to email me, I'll shoot my email out. I can send you the correct information. And I apologize that the wrong slide somehow got into our file. So best wishes. Thank you again, Valentina.
Thank you.
Great day, everybody.